Welcome to the program.
Hi, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Great. So there's quite a bit of stuff I want to touch on. Goes without saying, of course, some of the hot button issues as of late. But before we get into that, it's been a year since you guys, in terms of Parliament and your party as a new faction, has been in Parliament. And so, how would you summarize the last year? And what are some interesting lessons you think you've learned with this experience?
Well, a lot of people ask me that, and I tell them the same word every time. It's been interesting. It's been a learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
It is partially exactly what we expected, but also a little bit surprising to see that it is exactly what we expected. As many people know, we decided to remain in opposition for this term because we feel that as newcomers in the political field, we need to grow as well. We need to get some experience. We need to understand the ins and outs first. And by doing that, we have learned a lot. And what I can say is communication is key. Communication is key, and that goes across the board. Coalition, opposition, council of ministers, it doesn't matter. Communication is critical, and in many instances, I find that it's lacking. Given the level that I would want it to be at, and I think that causes many of the problems that we have, including the one that we're going to discuss just now, because if you come correct from day one with your actions, they will not be scrutinized in a way that they will be after the fact. People like to be involved, and that counts for politicians as well. Give somebody the information. Transparency goes a long way, and then you will see a better outcome. But hey, as we said, we're not the coalition, but hopefully in the future, that's going to change.
Okay. So on that note, another thing that tends to come up is, of course, that people usually have, and rightfully so, I would add, this disdain for Parliament because they feel like parliamentarians are not working per se. Where are the laws? And so now that you guys have a year under your belt, can you share what are some of the what is on the legislative agenda of the PFP, and are you going to deliver where that's concerned?
Yes, no, for sure. Well, first of all, when people ask about MPs and legislation, I like to explain to them how the process really works, because people think that MPs should create laws, whilst actually the whole point of the law is for the Council of Ministers who have a staff, a support staff, a legal team to actually draft up laws, because wetgeving, as they call it, legislation, is a very, let's say, specific legal field. I have a legal background, but I myself am not as they call it, a wetgevingsjurist. And my colleagues are not either. And I can tell you that it is impossible for one of my colleagues to write up a law in the way that it should be, systematically from scratch to finish. That's just not their expertise. But I do get the people's sentiment, because that is not the only right that an MP has. We also can amend laws. And that's where I think that the crux lies with MPs. We need to check the existing laws and fix the problems that we are seeing within the community. Me, for example, now I am thinking of proposing an amendment for the long lease ordinance that we have. Put some of these problems that we are hiding behind, let's say, no policy, lack of policy. I'm trying to put some of that, see what I can put in, a national ordinance, because it's necessary. We see at this point that if we wait on the ministers, if we wait for the system to work as it should, it is going to, stagnate at some point. And
the process of initiating a law also takes some time.
It's a very long process. First of all, you would have to draft up your proposal first with your elucidation. It's called the Memoriam van Toelichting. But after that, you have to send it to the Council of Advice. Once you do that, they have to give you back an answer, a full, legal advice on what you gave. Now, here is where it always goes south. And I can tell you that there are more than 120 pending legislation pieces in Parliament from since 2010 to now that have either stopped being worked on or basically just put in the back burner because of the legal advice that was acquired by Raad van Advies. Because Raad van Advies doesn't just tell you have to change this and that. No, they tell you have to do this research. You have to contact this board. You have to contact, for example, the SER and get their opinion on it because it has a social aspect. You have to, so it's within, the extra work that you're being given from the Raad van Advies is where most of my colleagues, from what I can see then in the past, have decided, you know what, let's just drop it. But then you have 120, 130, I think, actually pending pieces of legislation that are not being, worked
That's
on.
right. And I have a question. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
So in that case, can you guys can pick up any of those things and finish it all?
You would think so, because that would, work in the favor of the people. But you cannot.
Why is that?
Your faction, if your faction initiated it, your faction has to continue it. Now, what we can do, for example, is if there's another faction who proposed something in the past, and let's say the MP that proposed it is not there anymore.
What is the faction itself is not there?
That's also a theory, but then I think that you can pick it up, but in the way that you would have to start the process again. So you can take the draft of what they have.
So it's pretty complicated.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated.
Okay.
But you would also have to maybe ask for permission from the faction. Let's say, for example, you have the faction UD, which was originally the DP. So they have pending legislation there, but the DP doesn't exist anymore. So how do you go about that? And then there are some legislations that we think that we want to take up, but maybe it's not a priority for the MP from the UD at the moment. That we can contact them and see if we can do a joint venture. So it actually, we can work with each other. It's communication. But what you mostly see is people like to hold the laws to themselves. Maybe for the credit or whatever. But by the end of the day,
because listen to you, I still, out of the opinion, once you sign up for something, no matter how difficult or complex the challenge is, you have to fulfill it. And
that's what you sign up
It's
for.
been a long time. Complaints again in the community that, hey, our MPs, you guys are paid pretty well. And the workload, while it is a lot, and while understanding that the process to initiate laws takes a while, there's 15 MPs that have staff. And I do understand, again, Parliament doesn't, to my knowledge, Parliament doesn't have legal lawyers on its staff.
But we do get legal assistance from, let's say, the Secretariat, the SGs all have a master's degree in law, so they can assist us. But you are expected as an MP too. You have your faction, and you can put them to work. It's not a big legal team like a minister, but they can point you in the right direction. And what I, as an MP, believe in is that there needs to be a good correlation between the Parliament and the ministers. If I have an initiative as an MP and I propose it and I bring it and I word it, in a way that exactly what I want, I should be able to propose it to the Council of Ministers, to the minister that it pertains to, and request, listen, I want this law, this is what I want, and you guys have a legal team, you have the staff, you have the departments, can you guys work on this? It needs to be a back and forth.
But it shouldn't, and shouldn't Parliament have its own legal team as well?
Oh no, for sure. And I think they're actually looking
and is
into
that something that's budgeted?
Yes. Yeah, I think they're looking into that at the moment. I believe that this year they have started to give us some budget. I can't remember the exact amount, but we get some budget for legal advice.
But like outside or in?
Yes. So from within Parliament, but that per faction you get a certain amount.
Okay.
So
I'm asking because I'm thinking, this could be debated anyhow. But I'm thinking that Parliament should have in-house lawyers, because I do understand that even those that work the legal affairs, they themselves are stretched thin as well.
Yes.
So you have the ministers and you have Parliament, trying to grab whatever.
Yes, no,
piece of legal advice they try.
I really agree. I think that in St. Martin, in overall, we are lacking in the capacity to write laws, legislation-wise. We don't have an abundance of what I call wetgevingsjuristen that are just there and writing laws.
Sorry, what kind of law? You have a law background, right?
Yes.
What is yours in specific?
I specialize. My master's is in civil law, and within my master's, I chose a couple of directions, and one of them was kingdom law.
Okay.
So the statute and us, etc., and the other one was tenant law, so rent law, etc.
Okay.
And I also did philosophy, democracy, etc. So it's basically to understand the principle of what it actually is a democracy and res politica.
Okay.
And
gotcha.
Yeah, so because I kind of thought that would be, it would apply to St. Martin, So when I was coming back, I was like, let me just understand first what our relationship is to Holland before I.
mean,
come down
it's a
and-
good idea until you realize reality.
Yes, no, it's good that I have that background, but it also makes me a little sad because now I understand it a little bit better than most
Yeah.
people, and it's we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
We have a long way to go.
Okay. So one of the things I want to get into with you, and part of the reason why I invited you, while there's some other Parliament matters, I think I'll just have you on another time, is of course this issue relating to the Vineyard Heights
Yeah.
over the bank. Because one, you are a party in the situation in terms of being a former staffer whose name came up quite some
yes.
time among different ministers, but also recently, from what we've seen in terms of the Ombudsman's office inquiry into the situation, as well as even now the prosecutor's office opening a line of communication for
I
persons
saw
to
that
submit
yesterday. Yes.
information. So, where that's concerned, one of the things I noticed was also, besides the Justice Ministry, the VROMI Ministry has, the highest number of complaints at the Ombudsman. So my first question for you really is, besides staffing, what is lacking in the administration of VROMI?
Well, I can speak from my experience. I worked in the Ministry of VROMI from June 2016 up to October 2019, where I was abruptly removed from my position by the ex-minister Weaver. And in my 3 years of experience in VROMI, what I can tell you is, aside from staffing, the staffing is definitely a problem. I remember when I was the head of the department and we went to Curacao with ex-minister Peterson, the head of the permits department and the head of domain affairs department went down to Curacao with him, and we did a tour by the corresponding departments in Curacao. So we went to Aerope and we went to domain here in Curacao as well. And I came from St. Martin. I had a staff of 3 persons on me. We had our secretary, we had a policy advisor, and we also had an administrative worker. Within a total staff that was supposed to be, I think, 7 people, we had 3, and then with me included was 4. I went down to Curacao, and guess how many people the domain here in Curacao had working for them?
20?
65.
Wow.
So their laws look the same because all of us inherited the same laws from the Netherlands Antilles, yet the staffing priority in Curacao, the investments in the domain beheer department, they were astronomically bigger than here, sorry. And I do not understand where this priority came from, but working in VROMI, I kind of understood it a bit. I believe that VROMI has been systematically understaffed for situations like this to keep occurring. And that is my personal opinion on it, because what I have experienced in there is that if you don't have a lot of people within the departments themselves who stand up against the ministers, it's going to get shoved under the rug. And I was one of those persons. I reached the department and the department was running really smoothly. Now, not a lot of controversy, etc. But when I started to see what's happening, my legal advice, my objective legal advice in a lot of cases was negative. That was a change in VROMI that they didn't have. I remember my ex-department head, before I became the department head, he left. He left the island at some point because he felt he was being pressured too much. They were trying to force him to make positive advices where he didn't want to, and he didn't want to deal with it anymore. He left, and that was my example. Within 2 or 3 months after I started working is when this transpired. He had done left, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, all right, now I'm thrown into the deep. My department head, who guided me up to now, is gone suddenly, and I still have to figure it out. And that's when I realized that you have to stand up for yourself, but you also have to have some integrity. Sorry, and it goes a long way, but if you don't have that from the get-go, at some point they're going to have a problem with you. And I've had that with multiple ministers after the fact.
Okay, so what you're saying is, goes back to one of those historical problems St. Martin has had, something that persons kind of shy away from speaking of, which is simply boils down to vindication. And that usually is because, persons, if you didn't support the big machine at that time, well,
you're out.
Even
You're
down
out
to
of the
your family, would kind of be annexed from society and face difficulties where that's concerned.
Yep.
And
That's the risk of a small society.
Yeah. But those are things that have to change, because it really overall it chops away at our pillars of democracy. And so one of the things that your name came up so one of the things where your name came up was regarding the vineyard issue, particularly with the former minister Myers regarding the issuing of land in the same over the bank area, because you issued a negative advice about it, and can you
it wasn't a negative advice. We were not allowed to issue a negative advice. So when we got the proposal, as I explained, and this can go on record as well, we did not even make the advices from Domain Affairs.
When you get the proposal to develop the area,
the proposal to do the issuance of land.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so we got the general proposal from the minister. I remember back then under the my ex-department head, Mrs. Stewart, and he got basically the job to make sure that this issuance is done right. Basically what I explained actually in Parliament, which is that we have a lot of requests coming in. We want to give this area out to people. What's the best way to do it? And that's how my department had brought it to me. Therefore, my objective advice was also along that line. So what I suggested back then was very simple. We had an abundance of requests, but only 50 lots. So I said, in theory, the first thing that I thought of is an objective entity within the community, put there by law, the notary, So my immediate suggestion was to my department head, let's let the notary do a sort of a lottery system in which we categorize, the requests, young professionals, age group, et cetera, and then we would just give all of the requests to the notary and let them decide objectively without us interfering who would be the ones, the recipients of land. We brought this to the office of the minister back then, and here is where the whole negative advice memo and stuff started. We proposed this, and mid-proposal, without even hearing it, he stopped us. He stopped us and said, no, he doesn't want to hear any of that. He took out a USB and he gave it to the ex-department head. When we drove back to the office, because then the offices were not together, so we had to go to the government building and come back. I remember, so we went back to the yellow building.
Back in the yellow building. Yeah, okay.
And we looked at the advice, and my department head got so angry because there we saw advices and decrees already made up in the name of Domain Beheer, but not one of us. We were 4 people in the department then. 5. Us 4 and the department head. None of us even saw these names or made the advices or the decrees. So they made it already within the cabinet. This is facts, and I can put this on record as well. And when we saw this, we said, well, this cannot happen. So I immediately, before we even started with the case, I wrote my first memo in which I said, the advices were not made by us. We did not even do a background check to see if any of these people already have land. We cannot even assess the situation. So we cannot just give the advice. The instruction that we got then was that no, it needs to be done quick.
Okay.
So so that's how it started.
Wow, that's okay.
Yeah,
wow,
so, there's a lot of history. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I have several questions for you. So I'm trying to figure out what. Okay, so you mentioned that basically the advice given to those 50-something persons.
They were originally made by the cabinet of the then minister and not by Domain.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So on that note, can a minister deviate from a policy? And as far as the giving out of land, is that something that really requires legislation or just an internal policy for a minister to operate on?
To be honest, I believe it just has to be a policy, because in the legislation, a lot of people like to put stuff in national ordinances, but when it comes to policy really pertains on the executive part of government, and this is when the conditions of the long lease, etc., would come into play. Long lease is a civil aspect. It's not government law, it's civil law. So within the law itself, the minister does have some wiggle room to come to, let's say, for example, somebody has been illegally occupying a piece of land for 20 years. The minister can come to him and have a personal agreement, It doesn't have to be the exact same agreement as somebody else, because he has to fix the situation. So within that scope, the minister should have some wiggle room. But we are talking about the issuance itself.
Yeah.
The main executive decision, which is the long lease issuance. And to that extent, I believe that you should have policy in place, because policy limits your ability as minister. Because now, for example, what I just mentioned to you, there is no policy that says that the advice has to be made by Domain Beheer. And you would think that because it's been customary for umpteen years, that, people would respect it. But what I have experienced is that some ministers would come and stop what has been customary for more than 20 years, even before I was born, and basically say, oh, but wait, I'm the minister and there is no policy in place, so I can deviate. So they hide behind the lack of policy in order to, do more stuff within their own executive capacity. And that, I think, is the problem, because
Not enough checks.
then, exactly, then who controls you?
Correct.
Who controls you? And that's why I find, if somebody says there is a lack of policy, so I can deviate, I say I stop you right there, because who has to create said policy? What paradox are you trying to create? You cannot tell the people, because there is a lack of policy, I chose to go this route, while your first priority, to my opinion, had to be make the policy in the first place.
Okay, so one of my questions is, I know you've been out of VROMI for a while, but while you were there, do you have an idea how many requests there were for domain land?
I cannot say exactly, but I can ballpark it. It is at least more than 500 to 600.
Okay.
Yeah. So I personally have seen requests dating back all the way up to the 80s. To be honest,
That's pretty far.
And,
Wow.
and that's before I was born. So and I've met some of these persons. I've met persons that requested land in the year that I was born. And they're sitting there with me and they're telling me, young man, I've been trying to get land for a long while from before you were born, and I still can't get no answer.
And is it so? That's because that's something that came up, during this whole vineyard situation, was that, for example, the legal advice the minister received stated that basically, it can basically be considered, I forget the exact word, but null and void, let's say, because there was no follow up after a certain period.
Yeah, no.
But my question is,
I disagree.
once you make a request to government, doesn't government, no matter, and this is not the individual, but the institution, doesn't government have a responsibility to get back on you on a request that you make?
Yeah,
So does it fall on is it the fault of the person who made the request for not following up?
Yeah. You see, sadly, this is what's happening. What we see is that, in theory, in the law, we have something that's called a fictitious denial, a fictieve weigering. And this means that if you do not get an answer within the reasonable amount of time that you were supposed to get an answer from in government, which is usually 6 to 8 weeks, if you do not get an answer, then you can assume that your request was denied. Now, St. Martin is small, and that is just legal advice in theory. I do not agree with that as a politician at all, because that gives you room for nepotism. Because if somebody requests something, I believe that given how small St. Martin is, and given the civil aspect of VROMI being VROMI and land, you have to give them an answer. Because otherwise, as a minister, you can just go through the request and say, you know what, I don't want to work on this one, I don't want to work on this one. Oh, I know this person, I'll work on this one, and I don't want to work on this one. None of those 3 people that I just mentioned that are not being worked on, they're not even going to get an answer or even get, a notice, hey, and that's actually a process that I started to put in place, but that they stopped.
Which was
to give people who are not going to get an answer at least a notice to tell them that we have a backlog dating back all the way up to whenever. And so to please bear with us and to please follow up. So to give them a notice.
The ministers, the same legal advice also told the minister to publish in
indeed,
in the papers for at least a period of 2 weeks.
Yeah, because
to alert the public.
I understand it legally, because if you do want to take the hard road, let's say, to say, okay, let's do a cutoff, no problem. But then as good principles of good governance, transparency, so you have to publicize it as well, because people need to have a sort of grace period to come to you before you cut it off. That's just common courtesy. And I think that within his legal advice, although I didn't agree with the part of the fictitious denial, that second part about at least publishing it before you go down that road.
It alerts persons to determine, because then you give people the chance to determine,
do I still want this or
Exactly.
not? Exactly. Because who's to say all of those 54 people still want that land? Maybe some don't even live here anymore.
Correct.
But you need to give those who are still interested at least a common courtesy, an answer, and then let them decide how they would want to approach you as government after the fact.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
All right.
Welcome back, viewers. Welcome back, viewers and listeners. You're listening to the news behind the news here on 94.7 Mix FM. And I'm joined here with MP Raeyhon Peterson. And we're basically last left off on the topic of domain land, the Vineyard Heights situation that is currently ongoing. And so, one of my next questions for you is, as far as the process of requesting land, what is that like?
I can give you my my take on it. The process of do you want the internal process or basically as a citizen?
Yeah, as a citizen. Yeah.
As a citizen, if you want to request land, the law says that you have to request that to the minister.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did have in the past is a sort of a form that we used to let people fill out, but throughout the years that form has become obsolete and we don't really use it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do still like to use it, but within the department, I can tell you that it makes no difference if you do use it or if you just write up your own request. So basically, because long lease land is a civil aspect of the law, you have to basically explain to the minister why you would want the land, what's your plans with it. That if he goes into all of those details is another question, but I find that that's how you should approach the whole situation of land. So if you come in with a request, I am hereby requesting a piece of land. That's it. I do not believe that a general request at the moment, given the scarcity of land and also the amount of people that request land, I don't think that a general request would get an answer that easily. But if you are a citizen,
do you have to identify the land?
Exactly. So I believe that that's the best way to get an answer from the minister. You have to do some research at the cadastre, find out if there are pieces of land with no deed on it, find out if they have owners, check if they are built. So I encourage citizens, because all of the information regarding land is public information by the cadastre. I encourage them to do a lot of pre-research before you step to the minister, because we know that the minister, we see what's happening. So as a citizen, if you want to protect yourself and your interest, I would say just come with all of the facts, all of the underlying papers that you have, and send in a full. Your request has to be as full as possible to get an answer. That's my experience.
Okay, understand.
Yeah.
Okay, understand.
But side note, that still doesn't guarantee you receiving an answer
correct,
at all.
Correct.
Because of the lack of policy.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I asked that is also because one of the things that the minister mentioned on radio, but also in Parliament, is that as far as the 54 persons who requested, and I'm not sure if it entails others before that, but basically the decrees and stuff that they received, because they were draft decrees, and if he goes back and try to find their request, that is not there, and he presented in Parliament, an example of one that may have seemed
he chose one that was written on,
but also that he presented a list of written names, and so my question is then, where is all that data? And that's kind of the reason why I asked, what is the process of what is the process like of asking for land? Because basically, as the minister himself mentioned, as you're stating, that the administration of VROMI
there is no administration, and we've been trying
not lacking. I mean, it's not in existence.
No, exactly. It's not there. It goes hand by hand, and I don't think people understand. I think people think that VROMI, especially domain affairs, has a sort of automated system where everything goes automatically. No, it's 3 to 4 people working in Word documents. That's how it is. There is no extra software that they use. It's Word and Excel, and it's kind of sad, but that's the reality of it. And
so then, how can you trace? How can a minister, trace? Really have hard data as far as how many people requested for land?
If he wants to give you that exact amount, he cannot. I can tell you that he cannot, because from what I experienced, because I heard him too in the interview that you were talking about. I think it was a press briefing, or it was in Parliament. I don't remember. But when he spoke about not being able to find the files, a sort of light went on in my head, because I see that he is trying to use the in-booking system against the persons. And
what you mean by that?
So, for example, I think he mentioned something about a div number. So he couldn't find
there's
a
no
div number,
correct,
etc., and that those selected didn't have a div number. Div is the department in government that books in documents. Basically, books them in. That's it. They don't have any other. They book in a document so that it can be there on file. What I remember is that in 2016, there was no policy or even a custom to book everything through to Div, you had a secretary who used to book in the request, but we had no guarantee. So like I told you, when it came to those 54 people, we received advice and decrees already made up from requests that we did not even see. Now, there was nothing in place for us as department to say, wait a minute, Minister, these requests, we cannot find them in our own files, so why would we work on them, based off your instruction? That's not how it went. The minister instructs, and you decide. The minister even sent a written letter, sort of a warning letter to my ex-department head, basically telling him that the minister noted that you changed the advices and decrees that he sent. He would hereby like to tell you that he manually changed them back. Stuff that you cannot think of at this point, because at this point
manually changed.
Those are his exact words, and that's on record as well. So if that was the custom in 2016, you cannot now in 2021 tell everybody, because not everything was booked in the system, that means we can't find it. That means it doesn't exist. I've seen those files. I left those files in the office, in my office. It was 3 big blue maps, and I said this in Parliament.
Blue maps
of the over the bank situation. So all of the requests, all of the advices, decrees, the memos I made, etc. Everything was there. And the day that I left the office, it was there.
The minister is saying,
the minister is saying it's not there, but I don't believe him. To be honest, I don't believe him, because the documents were left there. If he's saying that means that somebody took them. But the ministry is under his command, so he's responsible for that either way.
But then what about the fact that, you had 2 ministers before him? 3.
Well,
what year did you leave?
2019 October, under Minister Christopher Weaver. And I think Minister Duran came in 2020, which is like 3 or 4 months after. So basically, by saying that, the only person you're accusing is the last minister who was there before you, because then I assume that the files disappeared then. Because I don't understand it, because as MP Emmanuel also said when he was minister, the files were there. We perused all the files, and he decided he does not want to go down that route because of all the complications.
And that is basically, particularly the files relating to the vineyard.
Yes.
But what about? So what I'm adding to that as well is just the general request for land.
Oh no, those kept coming in. And the minister can
but
give
then
you a
in the
ballpark.
past did they receive a div number as well?
Some did and some did not. I can personally tell you that I've seen all type of requests.
So then this goes back to a lack of administration from
a
the
lack
department.
of administration, but also a lack of policy. People did not know how to request land. It is only when I became the department head that I decided we are not accepting any requests that are coming in from anywhere else but Div. Because what we used to get back then too, and under MP Emmanuel, that was the same, they used to accept requests that came straight to the minister's office with a stamp that says received by the cabinet of the minister. That to me borders nepotism, because you can backdate the stamp, etc., which I have seen some weird stuff. Let me put it like that. So because of my experience with a couple of past ministers, I decided that when I became the head of the department, we were not to accept any request to come into the department if not sent downstairs through general affairs with a bookings number. So that means that it would be scanned in as well. If it doesn't have a div number, I personally, as the department head, would not take the case. And I made that clear to the minister. That has caused some problems, but that has also made sure that I do not, stray from what I assumed would eventually become policy. But till up to now, there are no clear rules in place.
Yeah, but what you last said is, okay, this situation, the blue map, at the end of the day, you and former Minister Emmanuel, MP Emmanuel, basically stating that as 2 former recent VROMI staff.
The files were there.
And now they're missing.
But then my issue is, if all of those files are missing, how did you go about doing a brand new issuance on the exact same property? Because we didn't only have long lease files there, we had infrastructure files there, we had supposedly what were the proposed lot sizes, the proposed lot numbers, so all of that. So I'm thinking, if all of that was gone, if the record of the court cases that we fought as government in the area are gone, then something is definitely wrong in VROMI. You understand? Because we've been battling for that land for, I think when I reached the department, the case was in appeal. The case started in 2014 by the Henson. I believe in 2016 it was in appeal. And then when I left 2019, it was still being contested by the Richardson family, who I was in contact with under Peterson. You know, so there is some truth to that article that they sent to me, because me and Minister Peterson were indeed in contact with that person, trying to figure out first what is the ownership situation exactly before we even try to put infrastructure in place. Because anybody that we promise anything towards the land to is going to, you know, find themselves in a hiccup, because we don't have enough infrastructure and there's still somebody else contesting the ownership of the land. You know, so that was around mid 2019 when he was removed, and after that the priorities kind of changed. But up until then, we were having meetings with said persons, the Richardsons, in regards to the land, and I was in contact with Cadastro to actually figure it out first before we move on the land.
And that, I guess that just fell through.
That process fell through. Minister Peterson was advised nicely by his coalition back then to resign, which he did, and after that, basically,
driving accident.
Yeah, you know, ironically, some of those coalition members were with him that night of the accident, but that's a whole nother story. But after that, under his own chief of staff, who then became Minister Weaver, things basically, you know, took a different turn. And yeah, so I don't know if Minister Duran is insinuating that after I left that those files were taken, but you know, that's something for them to figure out in VROMI, because that the files are there, and I can put that on record as well.
You left it there.
Yep, for sure. That's how I know the names of those 54 people. That's how I remember those memos of the ex-minister saying that he manually changed the decrees, etc. Because that was my first case, you know. So I know most of those 54 people personally as well, because I had to give them the documents that I was instructed to give to them. You know,
so the solution, I'm trying to figure out what exactly would be the solution to this ordeal, because will the new issuance have to stop, and will those who are part of the 54, will they also have to put in new requests because of the fact that the issuance of it was wrong in the first place?
Yeah. To be honest,
does government as an institution, is government as an institution held liable, or will this be more so a case of the minister personally, because his actions?
I believe that it should be the ministers, because this is their action, and of course, you know, it's not nice to try to hold somebody personally accountable for their actions, you know, in any role, as a civil servant, as a minister, or whatever. But this is one of those situations where if you received negative advices, negative memos from your department, and you decide to go through it anyway, and the country suffers damages, which in this case is going to be the case, because even if those 54 people, the judge says you guys are not supposed to get the land, okay, no problem, but the judge cannot say the money that you paid for the maidbrieven doesn't have to be reimbursed. So government will for sure have damages because of this case, and because of the personal aspect of it from the minister back then. You know, so you can blame government a lot, but when it comes to the Ministry of VROMI, I think that people should open their eyes. Most of the problems that we have in regards to VROMI are particularly personal choices of the people who are put there as ministers. It is not the staff, it is not the departments, it is the minister and his cabinet who always do these things, because they think that they can micromanage everything that happens within VROMI. You know, like I said in Parliament, the sense of entitlement to, you know, I am minister now, so I get to decide by law. That has to change. You cannot want to decide, you know, that specifically. You have to put some policies in place. You need to distance yourself from it. That's my personal opinion on how VROMI should run, you know, because the opposite way has cost us quite some trouble in the past 5 years. Yeah. And that's just based off of my experience.
Yeah, and you're not even going back further to...
Exactly. You know, I can go back even further to court cases with PDP, where the minister blatantly decided to go against a specific instruction from Parliament to not issue a land. They don't care. Yeah. You know, like they just don't care. You know, so
yeah, it's unfortunate. But see, so one of the things I noticed again with current Minister of VROMI Duran was that he basically said that he won't continue something that was done incorrectly. So one of the things that
the exact same thing again.
But one of the things that he stated was in Parliament in that meeting was the fact that now you have a pilot. So now you have a pilot policy, which basically granted land to persons who made a request from January 2020 to end of May 2021.
Yeah. Let me interrupt you right there, Rob, because it's good that you mentioned that, because I heard this pilot policy, and I want to say on the record that I am completely in disagreement with that. A pilot policy doesn't exist. That's just something that you created. A policy, I understand. You have to create said policy before you make the decision. You do not test out a policy
Particularly in giving out land.
Yeah,
That's kinda,
exactly.
yeah.
I don't understand the logic, because what if your pilot project goes south? Those people that you are promising to, they're going to have damages. You understand? These are people you're referring to. So I'm not going to, as a minister, I would never say, I'm testing this out pilot policy to see how it works. Stop, because there is no other piece of land on St. Martin in which you will have to have this sort of policy, which would mean a selection committee to give land to 25 people. The original intent of the law is that you give land per person, per parcel. And you can read that in airport auditing as well. Every long lease agreement is a personal one. So to have this sort of a batch behavior in which, that does not fit within VROMI, to my opinion, at all. A pilot policy, based on the people, I do not believe in that. Create the policy, publish the policy, give the people the reasonable amount of time by law to contest the policy, to object the policy, go through that process, and once you're done with that and the process is final and the policy is ratified and it is published, and then you can start with the execution of said policy. But don't tell me you're testing out a pilot policy on 25 people. That just makes absolutely no sense to me.
Well, what you're saying makes, I believe you asked that question. I'm sure another MP asked that question as well. I can't remember if it was MP Von Camper, who asked basically how many persons then requested within that same time period.
Yes, I request that as well, because if you're looking at
it ended in May 2021, and then we see where basically those 25 persons were granted the land just a month after.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that we have to watch out for. We have persons in domain affairs who have requested land from 2010, and they received land after 10 years. That's normal. But then what's to stop this current minister from doing exactly what you said? And I don't know where this whole pilot policy came into play, but then when did they start gathering the requests for the area in the first place? Because if you're saying, I'm cutting it off from January 2020, which is ironically when he came into office. So that already for me is off the bat, no continuation in government whatsoever, because you cannot say, I'm minister from today, so everybody that requests land from today.
Sorry, just a fact check. Election was when?
January 9th. So let's say from January 9th, we knew what the current government would have been. So I believe that their cutoff was just a general date, just the beginning of that year.
Okay, I follow you. All right.
So it's not specifically his tenure, but it's basically since we came into office from then. And to me, that's just not fair. That's just not fair, because a lot of people that I know personally have requested land before 2020. So why are they just be put in a back burner? And on top of that,
then do they? Because so he mentioned that there were criteria. For example, you had to have a salary of at least 3,000 guilders. That you, individually or with a spouse, you can with a spouse that you can supplement. Also, you have to have no land prior. So to give persons who have no inheritance, also persons who just never have, who don't also have domain land. The chance to be able to build their home and so forth.
Well, I can personally tell you there are a couple of hundred of those people within that request batch from the 80s up to now that I just mentioned. There are a lot of people who are willing, who have the finances, exactly, who have the sense of security, who don't have government land, who are ready to build. A lot of these 54 people, and some of them I know who are trying to get some legal advice as well, a lot of them are also young professionals with high salaries, with no land. So their question was then when they contacted me was, what's so different between us and them?
So I think it goes back to the same question of why a pilot policy in in a sense, and this is most analysis, not really an opinion, a pilot policy in a sense makes no sense because, why start from January 2020?
Exactly. A pilot policy would mean take the whole batch, let's put it in the criteria, and let's see what
Or
comes
more
out.
so before continue the process, as you mentioned with Peterson, clean up VROMI first.
Exactly. And that is what Minister Peterson was trying to do. And they can go on record to check. Minister Peterson did not randomly give off any piece of new long lease land to anybody within his year and change, because I was his legal
That's if the
advisor.
documents are there.
Yeah, exactly. And I specifically advised him from the beginning of his tenure, because he's also a personal friend of mine. And I advised him, bro, listen, we both come from VROMI as civil servants. We know what's going on in here. We need to fix the problem first. We cannot continue with it because we're going to add on to it. The foundation is already cracked. But we need to fix it. And he was like, you're right. So with that over the bank saga, even though he had his own peers in politics telling him, we got to get that land. That land is up for grabs, which is facts, people. That's what's happening in politics. He decided, no.
You're on record enough, by the way.
Yeah, I don't care. It's that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
But he decided, okay, let's call in the persons who are saying that the land is their family. Let's at least talk to them, see how we're going to figure it out. That he was in the process of that when it comes to over the bank. So if you just look at what the last ministers did with the over the bank property and just compare it to what he was doing, there's a big difference. It's either you want to come and fix the problem and not basically be the one to get the credit for giving the land off to people, because that's what ministers of VROMI do. He wanted to fix the problem first, and for him, he didn't even have to be the ones to issue the land. He just wanted to see the infrastructure we put into place, and then he can go. Because Minister Peterson was really about that life. He wanted nothing to do with it. He just wanted to fix it and leave. And they did not give him that chance because he did not, work me. That's, to my opinion, that's how it goes. So like you said, a pilot policy, if you would want to come with that, no problem. But then grab the whole batch of requests that I say is in the 500 to 600.
Yeah, and I think that going back to that lottery system, that
Exactly.
you make it transparent.
Exactly. So you can have 500 requests and give the land to 25 people. That's totally possible. Give that to the notary and let them objectively pick 25 from the 500, because then you, as minister, have done your due diligence and you have not chosen specifically handpicked people. You understand? That's what I find is lacking in this whole saga. The mentality. I see where the minister is going
more
with
so
it.
I think it boils down to a willingness to reform VROMI.
Yeah, exactly. It's either you want to come in VROMI and basically do what has been done with tenders, with building permits, with land, or you can come and say, you know what, this is the problem. This has been the problem for so long. I, as minister, am not here to look good. I am here to make sure that the process is going to be put in place. And if you do that right, trust me, the system will better itself. But if you make everything fall down to your decision whilst knowing that you have an agenda, then sorry, but this is going to keep happening. This is so deja vu to me, seeing persons receiving draft decrees in areas with no infrastructure, with land that's in, that's being contested, the ownership, it's the exact same thing that happened 5 years ago. And I'm sad that our new generation of ministers is just continuing it. That's just how it is.
And then finally, on the same vineyard situation, because one of the things that, besides everything that we discussed, that makes it all the more questionable is even the very same, just the architectural rendering bidding process.
Yes.
Because you have simply put, how can someone come to a bid, particularly for government, and state that, well, we're basically willing to do it for free. And after the bidding is closed, was still allowed to go and come back, and then come back
With
more
a
than
same-
3 months later.
Exactly, with a
but
very
way
low
below
symbolic price as well.
below market value. I mean, so
So what we understood is that that company or whoever had an agreement with VROMI to do more than just the rendering. And I think that that's why they came back with the offer of a symbolic price of 3,000 guilders. That's what I got from the documents that we saw. But of course, those documents were leaked, and hence why we asked the minister in the meeting, and hopefully he comes back next week, because I think, by the way, that he is taking too long with the answers. I come from VROMI, and within a day we used to have the answers. So this whole I need a week or 2 weeks, to me, is a smokescreen. Personally, speaking from experience. But that's a side note. I find that the minister, at this point, he needs to come back with the answers, but also actively try to fix the situation, because it's not looking good. It's not looking good.
No, not
a symbolic price. I have never seen the word symbolic price in a tender. A tender, you have to be specific as to what you're going to do, and you have to be specific as to what it's government money you're asking for.
Correct.
So it's not a deal that you're trying to get, in order to get another deal. This is not, this is government. You understand? I don't understand that mindset.
Yeah, I mean, the free offer alone, that in itself
as government, you should not want to take anything that's above market value at all. Period. Because who's to guarantee that you're going to get your money's
and
worth?
below market value.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because by the end of the day, that rendering, the proposal for infrastructure, etc., that's not for you to look good. That's for the people who you're going to give the land to live on. You understand? So you have to do your due diligence as a minister, but also as VROMI in particular as well. You cannot just say, all right, $3,000, no problem, bring it and we'll see. But you're playing with people's livelihoods. And now with all of the controversy that's emerging, who's to say that those people still even want to be part of that? That whole saga. But you're putting the civilians in a peculiar situation, to my opinion.
I think I mentioned this with someone else. When the elephants fight, the grass suffers.
Hey, yes.
Yeah, African proverb.
That's how it goes.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
All right, MP Peterson, I'd like to thank you so much for your elucidations and explanations. I think that this is information that the public definitely needs to be aware of.
Yes,
and,
definitely.
So on that note, thank you, and to all the listeners and viewers as well. I hope that you enjoy this program. Be sure to catch the next one of the news behind the news right here on Mix 94.7 FM. Do take care and have a great afternoon. All right.
All right.